All right, so we're back, and again we're looking at the same component we just created that uses session storage. Just to cache a search term in our browser, just so we have access to it, even if we refresh our page. So we just have dynamic access to our browser's storage, but obviously, this might be potentially logic we want to reuse, especially for different stateful variables, right? What we're doing here is basically saying, maybe we're going to save old state to our browser. And so we might want to look it up, right? And this may not be an idea that is, specific to this search term we're using in our input element. There may be, other stateful variables that we would like to keep track of as well, just in case. So to do that, we're going to refactor our code a little bit just to make this as reusable as possible. And so we're going to make our own hook in React, which sounds a little interesting. But what I really mean to say is we're going to make our own custom function, basically, that can take in whatever inputs we need, and that will always dynamically give us back the two values we want. Here we're not going to make this fully functional, so we're not going to make sure that, on a variable changing constantly, this will fire, so it won't be like most of the hooks we've seen so far. It won't be like use state, right? We're not going to re-render every time this variable changes. It's not going to be like use effect, or we're going to just keep firing. But in the event that our browser refreshes, at least, right, whenever our component loads, we're going to make a new function that will read state from session storage and then give us back either the existing value or some new default we can give it, right, and just make this more modular for us. So this, I guess, isn't 100% a new hook, but we're most of the way, to a fully functional hook, just like we want. We're going to name it correctly, too. So we're going to make a new function. So we're going to call this use state with session storage, and it's going to be a, again, it's just a function. We're going to take in two inputs, just like we were doing here, right? We're going to take in a key and then some initial value. So a key and then an initial value. And so during this refactoring process, I just need to figure out, all right, what do I need to, lift out of here to make this logic fully reusable, fully modular. And so here we're just going to say, all right, we're going to actually wrap this, stateful logic just into this function. So we're going to call it use state, and then basically use exactly the logic I have in here, right? We're going to call use state, and we're going to pass it either, right, the output of the session storage is getItem method with now just our key, right, to make it dynamic, or instead we'll return our initial value. All right, so use state is going to return one of these two things, again, depending on whether this exists or not, basically. This also obviously won't work if we purposely saved an empty value. This, if we saved like null or saved an empty string, through our use of the application, we're going to get the initial back regardless. We don't care about that right now, but it's worth thinking of. And then simply we'll return the value and our set value function, right? So all we're really doing, looks like a lot of complicated lines of code, but refactoring just so that use state's value that it returns us is dynamic. So we've really just customized the use state hook now so that instead of having to specify this default value and get that every single time our component loads, we'll get something a little easier, again, a little more dynamic, so that every page refresh, if we've been using the app already, we'll get back its, whatever our current data was. Implementing this is easy. All I actually need to do is just call it, right, which is the whole point here. But it also means if I want to, and I can pass it like the key search term and then some initial value of an empty string. This is a little easier, obviously. Additionally, I can refactor and make value just have our value variable from up here, right? So we can only use the get item logic in one place now, which is good. I only need it when the page loads. And so now our app we have, oh, it's because it's search term. Use the wrong variable. Apologies. Right now we have this actual value, and again our component will load, but we won't just have the input dynamic. Right, our state will actually use that value, and our initial data fetching is also going to use whatever value we've stored in our browser. Right, so now the page's experience will be just as it was before we refreshed, no matter what. Again, this is always what we're kind of looking for, right? We don't want to interrupt our user's experience with our code just because they refreshed the page, right, or did something that they're not supposed to, but that we can't control. We want it to be seamless. This is again one way we can accomplish that. And again, this is really a separate video just so we can hone in on this concept, right, of both refactoring, but also starting to refactor and use some of these dynamic React functionalities in reusable ways that might make sense. Again, here we see one example of creating, what's basically a hook. When the page loads, we will do this every time, and it makes our app easy and dynamic and makes reusing our code much easier. This is a nice beginning. We'll make our own, full, more complicated custom hook at some point in the future. But for now, we're gonna, stop here and just think about, how we can modularize our code now and, start writing better and more reusable React code with the stuff we've learned so far.